So tonight we're talking about a woman named, usually referred to as Ammachi, Ammachi. Also sometimes referred to as Amma, Amma. And if you find yourself interested in what you hear tonight and you want to explore it further, she has a website, which is www.amma.org. Amma.org. So if you want more than you hear tonight, which won't be much compared to what's available, go to Amma.org. And there's quite a lot there to check. Who she is, her teachings, her charities, where you can see her if you're inclined to see her. One of the reasons we're talking about her tonight is because it will actually be possible to see her this month, the third week of this month. If you find yourself that interested, go to the website and click on Schedule. And it'll show you where she's going to be in November in California in the event that you wanted to go see her. Which, to date, over 1 million people have done. Of all persuasions, ranging from radical Christians to radical everything else, to normal everything else, to atheists, to agnostics, to skeptics. They've all gone to see her, and many stayed. So we're talking about Ammachi, a woman who, well, let me say this first. In the 1880s, in her book, The Secret Doctrine, H.P. Blavatsky, there's a paragraph where she says, in the near future, souls will start being born of a very high quality. And at first they'll be regarded as oddities and freaks. But she says as the centuries pass, they'll gradually find themselves in the majority. But they will start appearing and they will be regarded largely as oddities and freaks. So this might be an oddity or a freak here we're talking about tonight. Certainly it's one of the types of souls that Blavatsky was speaking of. Ammachi was born, I have here, September 27th, 1953. September 27th, 1953. That makes her 51 years old at the moment, her body. And she was born in an extremely small fishing village in southern India. I mean, like small. Everybody poor. No one educated. 100 years before she was born in this tiny village in India, some Indian sage had walked through the village and said, 100 years from now, there'll be a being born in this village whose name will become a household word in much of the world. That was 100 years before her birth. So she was born in September 27th, 1953. I've read a lot of philosophy over the years, and I've studied a lot of different religions. I've studied a lot of spiritual texts. And I've never come across anything like this woman. The book out of which I'm going to be talking, which has a section on her in it, has kind of a biographical section of her, about her, and then it has some of her teachings in 19 different categories. And those teachings and those categories are just paragraphs, excerpts from different things she said about that, whatever that topic is. There might be like 4 paragraphs on a page. And I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I couldn't read more than 2 of those paragraphs before I had to stop, because they were so powerful. I just had to stop and take a break. So she's said to have been born with a smile on her face. And at 2, she was walking and talking. And at 3, she was starting to sing songs to Krishna. Her parents hadn't taught her anything about Krishna. No one had ever mentioned Krishna to her. But at 3, she started singing songs to Krishna. And at 6, she was writing songs to Krishna of her own. And to date, she's written several hundred, which are played on All India Radio more or less all the time. And also, around the age of 5 and 6, she would spontaneously go into these exalted states of consciousness, usually called samadhi. She'd spontaneously go into samadhi at the age of 4 or 5, which meant she lost all consciousness of her body in this world. So her body would just be lying there or standing there or doing whatever it was doing when she went into samadhi. And this phenomena her parents considered to be highly abnormal and unacceptable. So when she would spontaneously at the age of 4, 5, 6 go into these states, her mother would beat her, because this was abnormal and unacceptable behavior for a 4, 5, or 6-year-old. There were 11 children in the family. 8 survived. We're talking about very ignorant people here. So of the 8 surviving children, her skin was the darkest. It was so dark it was almost like it had a slight blue tinge to it. And among the ignorant in India, the darker your skin, the lower your status. So among the 8 surviving children, because of her dark skin, she was made the servant of the house. And she actually was not allowed to live in the house itself. She was given a little hut up behind the house, and she was actually the servant of the house, of the parents and the other children. That's how she was raised. That's how she was treated. And so she was punished for, beaten for going into these states, which her parents didn't understand what they were. And these are very poor people, and they had barely enough food for the family. And they would catch her taking food outside and giving it to children who had even less food. And she was beaten for that as well. So she was beaten quite a lot as she grew up. And in later life, she said it didn't bother her in the least because her consciousness wasn't connected with that body in the first place. It was connected with Krishna, which he chose to call Krishna. At about 6 years old also, she started quoting ancient Sanskrit texts in Sanskrit. No knowledge of Sanskrit had been imparted to her. She had no teacher. She's never read any spiritual books, but she knows what's in all of them, and has demonstrated that knowledge. So as she is getting older, her parents were becoming more and more embarrassed by her, largely because, to put it kind of crudely, she made them look bad because she was so eccentric. So she took to sleeping outdoors altogether, thereby avoiding some beatings. And she kept singing these hymns to Krishna. And when she'd worked an 14 or 16-hour day being the servant, supposedly now she'd have time to go to sleep. She wouldn't go to sleep. She'd spend the rest of the night singing songs to Krishna. So she almost never slept. And some of the villagers, the peasants in the village, started to think that this woman was unusual and perhaps worth listening to, whereas the family was saying she's unusual and a problem. And the more she would almost randomly go into these states of samadhi. She could be anywhere, and suddenly the body would be stationary and she'd be gone. And over time she gained control over this whole thing, of course, but we're talking about a young girl here. And when her parents and her brothers and some of their friends found out that she was starting to be admired by some of the villagers, they decided, actually, being rational, they formed a group, actually. They called themselves the Rationalists. The Rationalists. They gave themselves a name. And the goal of the group was to kill this girl. So one of the attempts was at the behest of one of her brothers, who hired what we'd call a hitman to kill her, because she's just too much of a disgrace to the family. And so this hitman was armed with a dagger, and he walked up to her with a dagger all ready to plunge it into her chest. And as he walked up to her, he dropped the dagger and fell down weeping, apologizing to her, and became one of her first devotees. There were also various other attempts made on her life, just bizarre things like knowing where she was going to be walking and strewing that path with poisoned thorns, so that when she walked across these thorns, the poison would kill her. And she walked across the poisoned thorns and nothing happened. And there were several other attempts on her life. They all failed. And later on, because she's not a public figure yet at the time we're speaking, later on, when she was a public figure, she was asked about these attempts. And when we get a little further and see what she actually does a lot of the time, exposing herself to thousands of people at once, one by one, and having physical contact with them, she was asked, why don't you have bodyguards? I mean, there have been attempts on your life, why don't you have bodyguards? And she says, I have divine protection. So she has no bodyguards even to this day, even though she might be in a crowd of 3,000 people, allowing each one of them physical contact with her. No bodyguards. Even the Dalai Lama has bodyguards. She doesn't. When she was about 11, her parents shipped her off to another part of the family to be their servant. So she was their servant for 7 years. Again, treated as a servant. Same problem. She'd go into these states. She'd get in trouble for it. And but all the while she was developing her consciousness in the direct calling, as she put it, calling Krishna. Later in her, when she became public, which she very much is today, she points out that it doesn't matter what you call it. She calls it Krishna. She says, call it whatever you will. It's one and the same thing. So whatever you want to call it, you call it whatever you wish. It doesn't care what it's called. She called it Krishna. And her parents finally, then she went back to her parents again. They finally started to perceive that there was something rather unusual about their daughter, but they were still thinking about being humiliated by something so unusual. Remember what Blavatsky said about freaks of nature. So they finally took her to an astrologer, which would be a rural one, as distinguished from the ones we have in this country for the most part. And this astrologer told the parents, twice she'd refused to get married. They'd betrothed her twice, and both times she threatened on one occasion to run away, and on second occasion she threatened to drown herself. No, I'm not getting married. You're not marrying me off. So after these two refusals to be married, her parents took her to an astrologer, which asked, what's with our daughter here? So the astrologer told them that their daughter was a Mahatma, which means great soul. We've mentioned the word here in past talks. H.P. Blavatsky mentioned the word Mahatma for the first time in 2,000 years in 1875. These are fully enlightened beings walking around on the earth. And the astrologer said, your daughter's a Mahatma. She's not destined to be married. She's not destined to lead a normal life. She's destined to make a vast difference in the state of the world. So the parents eased off a little on the beatings. But she still would go into like she'd just disappear, and her mother would have to go find her. And once she found her standing in a swamp, just in the middle of a swamp, in a state of samadhi, and her mother had to chant a bunch of divine names to get her attention to bring her back here. So her mother found out how to get her back. You chant the right divine names, and she'll come back. When she was about 20, she went through several phases of development of her own consciousness. And when she was about 20, she decided she had to focus her entire attention upon what she called the mother. The mother, capital M. So she spent 6 months meditating on the mother. And at the end of those 6 months, she'd become one with the mother, which is, in a certain sense, higher than Krishna. She said, there's a statement here, if I can find it. Yes. It says here, at the end of the 6 months, at the pinnacle of her glorious process of awakening to the divine, Ammachi attained perfect union with the radiant source energy, the Divine Mother. Hereafter, her irreverent visitors began to call her Amma or Ammachi, Holy Mother. In a profound statement of non-dual God realization, Amma has revealed, and this is her quote from that period, "From that day onwards, I could see nothing as different from my own formless self, wherein the entire universe exists, as a tiny bubble. From that day onwards, I could see that nothing is different from my own formless self, wherein the entire universe exists as a tiny bubble. I can't imagine it. A formless self, conscious, in which the universe exists as a tiny bubble. That's what happened at the end of that 6-month meditation on Mother. When she was 22 years old, she made her first public appearance. It was kind of a village festival devoted to Krishna, with people coming from different villages and stuff. It was just an annual event. For some reason, she decided to go. She was just this girl. I mean, she's unusual. Her reputation kind of preceded her, but she's still just this girl. And going to the festival along with everybody else, and the Krishna festival. And in southern India, in this little village, at the time of the year this festival was occurring, it was about 107 degrees out, and there wasn't enough water for people to drink. There were about 1,000 people, and somebody gave her a glass of water, and she turned that water into a certain East Indian cooling beverage. In enough quantity to give water to all those 1,000 people. And this was witnessed by all those 1,000 people. So that was her first quote-unquote miracle. She denies that miracles exist. Everything's the operation of some law on some plane of reality. She stopped doing that sort of miracle fairly quickly. But she began, after that first occasion, 3 nights a week, she would, three nights a week, she would manifest as Krishna. Not literally, like she had her own, the same body was there, but the vibe was pure love, pure wisdom, pure compassion. And during these periods, people would be healed physically of things that supposedly were unhealable. People with psychological problems would find them gone. People with a lot of mental obscurations keeping them from enlightenment would find those obscurations gone. Just because she was standing there. She wasn't hugging people yet. She was just there. And this went on for some time. But then she did the 6-month meditation on the Mother and had the experience I read to you. So then the manifestations started switching more toward manifestations as the Mother. Same kind of curing, same kind of healing. She defines a guru as one who brings to consciousness a person's the things that are keeping a person from being happy and joyful and content. She defines a guru as someone who brings that to the surface and shows a person how to disperse it. Because she says our natural condition is one of contentment and peace and love. And she's been asked on many occasions, like, who are you? Or what are you? And one of her answers was, on one occasion she said, I am an infinite void filled with compassion and love. I'm an infinite void filled with compassion and love. So she started doing this Mother manifestation. She's 22, 23 years old. More and more people are being attracted. When she was about 25, the first person showed up who asked her, "Will you be my teacher?" This was a Hindu young man. Over the course of the next couple of years, she ended up with 5 students. 2 Frenchmen, 1 German, the rest East Indian. And they built a little ashram right there near her parents' house, which her brother tried to tear down. And the family was so against other people being there that she found it best to send 3 of them away altogether for a while, and 2 stayed. And so part of in the early days, as it's called, she started taking on some pupils and establishing a regime or a routine for them. And she was only taking on pupils who desired to attain self-realization, or God consciousness, or Christ consciousness, or Buddha consciousness, or, she says, whatever you wish to call it. But she only took on people who were really serious about that. And it's a real, and she still does that. She has a number of pupils, not many. She's not looking for pupils. Part of the daily routine of these pupils is that they, in the course of a waking day, which starts at 4:30 in the morning and ends at 10 p.m. with no naps, in the course of that length of time, everyone's meditated for 8 hours in her presence. And if your mind drifts off what you're supposed to be meditating on, you'll feel a little something bang against your head like a pebble, which it is. And she's throwing a pebble and bounced it off your head because she's reminding you that your mind is strayed. Get back on the subject. So she's pretty serious. It's apparently quite strict with her pupils. She says things like, if even a little ego should show itself in one of my pupils, I'll wipe it out instantly. She says, I'm here to serve the self. I'm not here to serve the egos. Yeah. So she's pretty strict with her own pupils. They finally got it together, the parents. She convinced the parents. She said, if you just let happen what's starting to happen here, Mom and Dad, you'll be taken care of for life. Just be patient. And by now, Mom and Dad are well taken care of for life. They've also become her devotees. So at a certain point, maybe when she was 24, she started traveling. First around India in an old dilapidated bus somebody had donated. And she'd just go to some town and along with her close pupils, and they'd arrive in some town. I mean, it had been prearranged, like where to go and stuff. So they would arrive at the place. Her pupils would sing a few songs, do a little chanting. She'd just be sitting there, seemingly distracted. And then after the singing and chanting stuff was done by the pupils, then everybody who'd come to see her would get in line, and the line ended at her. So you're getting in line to have an encounter with this being. And what happens is you get up next to her in line and she hugs you. And she kind of might massage your back a little bit, or right in your forehead here where your so-called third eye is supposed to be. And she'd hold you for a while. And then she'd tip your chin up so she could look directly into your eyes. And there are just thousands and thousands of accounts of people's lives being changed when she looked into their eyes. Just the look. There's a person in this room who's had that happen, who says it doesn't stay, but it can be brought back in an instant, anytime it's needed. That look of pure eternity, pure love, pure compassion, absolute selflessness. She says to people who say to her things like, I love you, Mother. She's been heard to say things back such as, if you don't love even the smallest ant, you don't love Mother. She says, I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere. She says she has 3 forms, although she puts it in terms of Krishna. One form she calls personal. That's the one you can get in line and get a hug from. There's actually a body there that can be seen and interacted with. So she has a personal aspect, and as she says, or Krishna does. And then she says there's a transpersonal aspect. And that's the aspect of herself that is formless. Formless. Beyond all form. And then there's an aspect of herself, she says, that is everything. So everything. She's everywhere. And she's also in a body at some geographical location. And she's also utterly transcendent and unknowable. And she says that there are other beings like her. She calls them Mahatmas. She said that she's been asked, why are you here? And her answer is, because there's so many people seeking me. So I had to come. So the seekers are here. And they come to her by the hundreds of thousands. By this point in time, she's been in almost every country. The reaction's almost always the same. The stories coming in about her and about people's experiences with her are coming in too fast to keep up with. There are already about 10 volumes published of such stories. This is the first case we have in what you could really call documented history, where all these things are actually being documented as they happen. They're not taken on faith, like with Jesus or Krishna or Rama. I mean, this is actually occurring. People are witnessing it, various aspects of it, writing about it. One of the things she does is, we'll be getting back to the hugging. Apparently there are many different responses to her getting a hug from her. Some people are cured from something. Some people's minds may suddenly become clear. Some people may suddenly experience reality itself. Other people may have hindrances that they're carrying from life through lifetimes, which are still hindering them in this lifetime, just suddenly disappear. And all of a sudden there's no more struggle and everything's fine. She says that when a person awakens to this, she compares it to, she said, now all of us when we sleep, sometimes we have dreams, and when we wake up, we say to it, we know we had a dream. And she says when a person achieves self-realization, capital S self-realization, it's the same thing. You've awakened from a dream. Life is a dream, she says. But it's a divine dream, because she's everywhere. She says that her highest teaching is that basically that, again, call it what you will, God, Krishna, Buddha, it doesn't, like she said, doesn't care what you call it. The highest state is to realize that that's all that exists. There's only one thing that exists, period. That's her highest teaching. So all multiplicity is some kind of misperception, some kind of ignorance. Only one thing exists. Even quantum physics says this now, only it calls it light. She calls it light too, but it's conscious. And sometimes when people get fond of her and think they're forming some kind of relationship with her, she will, depending upon the case, point out to the person, please do not identify me with the body you're talking to. I've got nothing to do with this body, she says. Except it's a vehicle I'm using to talk with you all. But please don't think you know me because you're interacting with this body. It's so she has two basic things going at the moment. One is her group of close disciples or pupils, kept very small, who live with her in a rather large area where the little hut used to be. And apparently you can go visit there for a day, a week, a month. You can go there and stay forever if you want to. But you have to be willing to undergo that regime if you're there. 6 months a year, however, for the past 20, she's traveled. And when she's traveling, she's not teaching her own little group of disciples. She's opening herself to anyone who wants to see her. There's no charge. When she comes into an area where she's scheduled to be, anywhere in the world, they've already, lined up where she's going to be ahead of time. She goes right to that place, or she asks, "Where are my children?" And she goes right to that place. She never meets any dignitaries. She never meets any bigwigs. Couldn't care less. She just wants to, where are my children waiting to be held? And she undergoes this 6 months a year, which is rigorous. She's traveling all over the world, and she's hugging thousands and thousands of people on each trip. And in hugging them, she always takes something. An illness, negativity, blocked chakras. Every case is different. She takes something that gives the person more peace, more love, more contentment, more vision, more compassion. She takes these things. And a few years ago, there was a doctor who met her, who knew that she takes these things from people. And he asked her if he could have a sample of her blood just to see what's going on with her blood. And she said that would be fine. So he takes a blood sample, and it comes back. And he goes to her and says, "You have so many viruses and illnesses in your body. I'd like you to please explain to me why it's still alive. It should be dead, given what's in it." And her only reply was, "Mother has work to do." She doesn't suffer physically, even though she has all these things in her body. When she's, quote, at home with her close followers, even though they have this rigorous routine, part of it is like just ordinary stuff. Time to clean up, time to do the dishes, time to clean the bathrooms. When she's at home and all that stuff's going on, she's right in there doing it with everybody else. She's not sitting on some throne somewhere while everybody else does the work. She does just as much work as anybody else. She lives very, very simply. She wants nothing for herself at all. Her possessions are probably about on the level of Gandhi's possessions when he died. About 8 or 9 things. Every cent that comes in, and she's never asked for money. She never has asked for money ever. And I've mentioned in these talks quite a few times that true teachers never ask for money. Well, here's one that never asks for money. But the money comes rolling in. The money comes rolling in. So if you go to our website, amma.org, and click on charities, you'll find a surprising array of charities she set up to help everything from AIDS victims to motherless children, to help young people learn how to use computers. She's building a hospital. All her money goes to charity, helping human beings. I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts, if you don't mind. That one I've already mentioned. When she's seated somewhere seeing these long lines of people, she's usually not teaching. She's just holding them. But she does teach, and she's taught quite a lot. And as I say, they can't keep up with it. The book I have on her has her teachings and has 19 different categories under it, in which she teaches things. And she says, it's said that most people that she sees aren't ready for the teaching that only one thing exists, period. That's a highest state, and she says most people aren't ready for that yet. So what she generally teaches people, or advises people, that is, if they ask. She doesn't give unsolicited advice, but if asked, she normally recommends a development of discernment. Discernment. A big part of discernment, for her, a big part of discernment is keeping track, as one goes through one's day, of what's permanent and what isn't. That's discernment. What's permanent and what isn't. And to put your mind on what is as much as you can. Even while you're hammering the nail, which you know is impermanent, you can still keep track of what's permanent. You don't have to live in two worlds. So discernment is what's permanent, what isn't. She states, like every other great teacher, that nothing that's impermanent can bring lasting happiness. In the world of impermanence, happiness is at best extremely temporary, often turns into its opposite. So she says, don't look for happiness. Don't look for happiness here. Look forward in that which is permanent, which is within every single one of us, she says. Yeah. So that's discernment. She encourages people to develop discernment. Don't let the impermanent take you captive. You may have to work in a world, live in a world of impermanence, but don't let it take you captive. She says you can drown in it. Yeah. Then she says also, to other people she'll encourage detachment. That's a harder one. It has to do with overcoming likes and dislikes. I like this, I don't like this. I love you, I hate you. All the polarities, likes and dislikes. She says the ego, which is the only thing that stands between us and her, she says the ego is literally the product of our likes and dislikes. So if a person can learn detachment, and it's a process, it's a practice. As when practice is trying to get beyond one's likes and dislikes, the ego will gradually shrink. But like discernment's a practice. I mean, okay, I'm going to be discerning from now on. It doesn't work that way. It's like minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, trying to be discerning. Remember discernment. Same with detachment. Okay, I'm detached. I'm cool. Everything's the same to me. No likes or dislikes. Nope, sorry. We all know better. So it's a practice thing again. Bad word for Americans, having to practice something. But so practice, you got to like or dislike going, practice being detached. Different way of saying the same thing. Practice accepting things as they are, which requires, she says, faith. She says your greatest enemy, she's speaking to spiritual seekers, she says your greatest enemy is doubt. Your greatest enemy is doubt. And she says doubt is learned. What is not learned or taught is faith. So she says replace your doubt with faith, which is extremely difficult to do when one's been trained to doubt. Faith in what? Faith in the process. If you want to get more profound, faith in the goodness of things. Faith in the light. If you're a religious person, faith in whoever it is you worship, or whatever it is you worship. Another thing she says, which is very helpful, although it's a little scary to some people, is maybe I can't find it. It's okay. Oh yes. What she does is, if you get the opportunity to speak with her, she'll ascertain, so to speak, what's your trip. What's your trip? Are you in a religion? Are you an atheist? Are you an agnostic? Just what's your deal? Actually, she doesn't ask you, because she just knows by looking at you. But apparently what she does is she addresses herself directly to what your trip is. And she never tells she has no teaching, as she says. If you're on a trip, though, like you're Buddhist or Christian or Hindu or whatever, if you're on a trip, she'll encourage you to stay on your trip and develop discernment and detachment. But stay on your trip. She has no trip to give you. If you're on a trip, stay on it. If you're not on one, find one. She says though here, those who say only our religion is true are mistaken. Real Mahatmas will never be bound by an institution. They will go forward keeping the supreme truth alone as the ideal. These Mahatmas, they have not insisted on any narrow rules. There is no harm in having many religions and faiths, but it is harmful to think they are different and that one faith is higher and another lower. Do not see the differences. See the unity in them and the great ideals which they teach. What all religions show is how to develop compassion, love, faith, forbearance, endurance, renunciation, etc. This is what is important. Religion means expansiveness, the ability to accommodate anything and everything. Religion is the merging of mind where all differences disappear. So for her, religion just is expansiveness. Until your consciousness is so expanded that nothing's left out. And then you've realized yourself. This thing about doubt being the enemy. There are many masters around the world who have attained that ultimate state. If they could do it, you should be able to do it too. Why have doubts? Try. Doubt is learned. You learn to doubt. You never learn to believe, to have faith. Doubt is your number one enemy. Faith is your best friend. Have faith and put forth effort. You will see the outcome. Totally positive. The basic path that she herself teaches, well, I wanted to mention one more thing. She mentions detachment and she mentions discernment. And the third thing she usually mentions, not necessarily all to one person, but the three general things she usually mentions, discernment, detachment, devotion. Her pupils are encouraged to go on the path of devotion. Devotion to what? The higher self, God, Krishna, Jesus, whatever, Buddha, whatever you want to call it. As she says, it's not a name. It's beyond all names. And she also says that it bears every name. Even our names. Because we're part of it too. But we don't know it because we have likes and dislikes that tie us into the world. There was one case of healing where there was a leper named Dutton. He lived in a leper colony. And he was such a seriously infected and hideous leper that none of the other lepers would have anything to do with him. And somehow she heard about him, and she brought him to where her headquarters is. And she spent a year curing this Dutton to the point of actually sucking the pus out of his sores. And when some of her pupils saw her doing this, they'd actually throw up. It was so horrifying a spectacle. And Dutton's now a functioning human being, no leprosy. He's one of her devotees. The brother that tried to have her killed is now one of her devotees. Some people have compared her to Sai Baba. Some of you have probably heard of Sai Baba, and who's been doing his thing for 40 years. And some people have compared them, both as the state of consciousness as well as teachings, as well as right down to bodily mannerisms. So somebody asked her once, do you know Sai Baba, or do you ever intend to meet Sai Baba? And her reply was, I see him all the time. She's all-seeing. And it's said that when she looks into our eyes, I can't really imagine this, but she says when she looks into a person's eyes, she doesn't see the body, she doesn't see the personality, she doesn't see anything except herself. But in seeing herself in us, it like activates the part in us that's herself, if even just for a moment. But there are many accounts of such a moment changing people's lives permanently. And another thing that's been noted about her is that the crowds have sometimes gotten so large who want to have a hug. There may be 3,000 people. So this might take 3 or 4 days and nights before everyone gets their hug. And during these 3 days and nights, she's just sitting there, giving hugs to thousands of people who've waited in line for hours. And during those 3 days and nights, she hasn't gotten up. She hasn't gone to the restroom. And her fragrance, which at the beginning smells kind of like a flower, after 3 days and nights still smells kind of like a flower. There's absolutely no sign of tiredness. Oftentimes after these long 3-day night things where she's been hugging people, her disciples will say, you've got to go get some rest and at least lie the body down, which she'll do. But on many occasions, she hears somebody outside who came late and didn't get a hug. So much to her disciples' dismay, she gets up and goes out and gives them a hug until it really is over. And then she lies the body down. But it's said that she never sleeps. She never sleeps. Eternal, formless consciousness never sleeps. It's always awake. So she allows her body to sleep occasionally. She eats virtually nothing. I suppose most physicians would tell her, you're going to die if you don't eat better. She eats virtually nothing. She's in fine health. One thing that apparently she does do is she wants to make sure everybody around her has had enough to eat. So she enjoys feeding people. And at the end of one of these are all free, or these hug fests, they're all free. At the end of these hug fests, where they say there are 2,000-3,000 people, and they all, after they've been hugged, they all stay around, just because of the vibe, just because you're in the presence of pure love, and you know it, and you know you've never been there before, so you hang out, after you've been hugged, and plus your life may have been changed in the process. So at the end of it all, there might be 2,000-3,000 people hanging out, and she's hugged the last person. And most people bring her like a little something like a flower or a piece of fruit or something. So at the end of one of these things, she's surrounded by all these flowers and stuff. And at the end of it, she stands up and walks and grabs a bunch of these flowers and stuff. And she stands up and walks through the crowd, showering them with these flower petals. And apparently many people who have experienced that have a feeling of being totally at one with her. Or just a feeling of oneness, not with her. In Japan, when she went to Japan for the first time, Japanese are notoriously shy. And very rule-bound, and things are done a certain way. So they'd heard, enough of them had heard about her, so there were a bunch of people there who wanted to see her, but they were all hesitant to actually walk up and hug her, because this isn't done in Japan. Walk up and hug some stranger. You probably don't even hug your brother or sister. So. People are just kind of standing there, and she cracked a joke, which got everybody laughing, and then the hugging just took care of itself. Yeah, it took care of itself. I'd like to read you another passage here. She talks about the moment of revelation. She's not talking about divine revelation. She's talking about there's a moment when it might happen to a person that their real self is suddenly revealed to them. They wake up from the dream. She calls that the moment of revelation. She says it can come to anybody, anytime. The moment of revelation that has occurred to many great souls can happen to you as well. Everybody is being prepared to reach this final state of dropping all worldly attachments, all ego. It must happen because that is the final stage of evolution. You cannot avoid it. The final destiny for all souls in this or a subsequent lifetime is the dropping away of every obscuration to peace and contentment. When that moment comes, the ego is dropped, and you won't struggle anymore. You will just bow down and surrender. What an incredible statement. So, if any of you would like to get a hug, check out the website, ama.org. Click on schedule. The 18th and 19th of November, she'll be giving hugs for free, all day, both days. And then there's a 3-day retreat, which you have to pay for, which is slightly more structured and much smaller. And then at the end of the 3-day retreat, which is the afternoon of the 22nd, the free hugging starts again. So there's a window there if you want a hug from such a woman or such a being, or even if you don't want a hug. Maybe you're one of these skeptics. She has many people who came to her as skeptics who are now her devotees, and because to her it's all one. She doesn't care who we think we are, what we think we are. We're wrong, and. So if you're inclined, it's possible to actually do this in November. I don't know when she'll be back to this country. Even if you just want to go up and check out the vibe. Because these kind of people don't show up too often. Although it's said that in her ashram, where she teaches her private pupils, there's already been one birth that's going to be just like her. And I've talked to her a couple of other times, and both times the questions come up, well, why aren't these people born in the United States? And my answer is, I have no idea. But I was told that one has been born in the United States, but in a Native American tradition, and is keeping very much so far to himself. But other than that, who knows? At least she's willing to travel. And yeah. And she says, speaking as the Divine Mother, she calls humanity her children, and she means it quite literally. She says, I will go wherever I am called by seekers. So wherever their seekers calling, she'll go there. Now, so it's not necessarily all programmed years ahead of time. And,
where's this location?
Joe, where's the location?
San Ramon.
It's on her website. It's out southeast of Oakland, about 30 miles. Yeah. Okay. Here's another interesting statement she made on some occasion. Everything, even supreme bliss, is within you. An unshakable faith will enable you to realize it in experience. The momentary pleasure derived from sensual objects is only a portion of the infinite inner bliss. It is our ignorance that prevents us from cognizing this limitless treasure of eternal bliss. Remove the self-made dam of ego and ignorance from your mind and enjoy the continuous and unbroken flow of the Lord's grace. Then there's a one-liner. Fascination for anything except God is dangerous. Again, you can substitute anything you want to for God. But fascination for anything other than, you could say, the eternal is dangerous. Then she says, if the desires are not controlled now, later they will control you, and eventually they will swallow you. So she's a little bit hardline. So as I said at the beginning, I've met I've met wise beings, and I've met the Dalai Lama, a couple of others, but I've never come across anything like this before. I mean, and the strange thing is, it's all like documented. It's not like we're hearing about something 1,000 years later, and we've got to take someone's word for it. You've got thousands and thousands of people say, yes, I saw this. This happened to me. You know, my lifelong disease is gone. My mental illness is gone. My hatreds are gone. You know, my worrying is gone. Just story after story after story. And as I said, she has a biographer, and the stuff's coming in way too fast for him to keep up with it. And she's assured people, that, especially a doctor, who said, "How can your body be alive with all this horrible stuff going on in it?" She's assured people that she intends to be around for quite a bit longer. So you'll probably hear more about her, whether you're inclined to be interested in her or not. Apparently her name's going to become a household word. Not necessarily positive. I mean, maybe some people will be like her parents. And it's kind of a grassroots movement. It's a grassroots movement. She just goes wherever there are people who know there's got to be more than this. There's got to be more than this. Getting and spending. Going through circuitous days. Counting the number of hours till the damn thing ends. There's got to be more than this. And she's saying there is more than this, and it's everywhere. And if a person can start one way or another moving in some of these directions, their days won't change, but their attitude towards them will. An attitude of, oh my God, I've got to go to this again today, is pretty different from the attitude of, today I have the opportunity to exhibit as much love and compassion as I can to everyone I encounter, even if it's only a smile. Different point of view, same day, It's said that she makes no distinctions at all between people, except it's been noticed that sometimes she'll spend a little more time hugging somebody who is bringing to her a very deep sense of sin or guilt. She'll spend just a little more time with such a person. Because they're carrying too heavy a load. She tells her own pupils, not the hugging thing, but back to her own pupils, she tells her own pupils just flat out, forget the past, period. Gone. Gone. Forget it. Don't have to work it out, don't have to figure it out, don't have to analyze it, don't have to make a bunch of connections, how do you get here? Just dump it. So that leaves you with the future, which he also says dump. Dump it. Which leaves you in the present, which is, she says, is where it's all happening, in what she calls the eternal present. This doesn't mean you don't make plans, but once you've made your plan, then get back to the present. So that's another discipline, just stay present. And here's a gift of an earnest spiritual seeker. So you can find out here if you're an earnest spiritual seeker is one of the criteria. To be able to put oneself in another's position, to be able to see and to feel as another person does, this is the rare gift of an earnest spiritual seeker. To totally put yourself in the position of another and to see and feel as they do. Which wouldn't be possible if I'm completely bound up in myself. So as I say, she has no teaching of her own. She's not looking for pupils. one time, early on when she was performing what appeared to be miracles, people would ask her to do a miracle, and she'd say, "I'm not here to perform miracles. I'm here to eradicate the desire for them." Yeah. And I think we'll just end on a quote here. She places quite a bit of stress, by the way, on the importance of having a teacher. She says that anything else in life, a teacher is kind of important if you want to learn something. So it's important, she says, to have a teacher. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be a book. It can be a scripture. And she says it's important to have some kind of practice, because this won't happen by itself. She doesn't care what one's practice is, just that one has one and is consistent and tries to incorporate into it detachment and discernment and devotion. And then when she has been at home with her pupils for a few months and it's time to start traveling again, and they say to her things like, "We don't want you to leave. We'll miss you when you're gone." She tells them that she won't be leaving and she's never arrived. And that she's with them all the time. She says, "I'm with you all the time." All the time. I mean, this is almost it's so far off our conceptual maps, which is perhaps why she says it has to be experienced to be understood. She says there's no way to explain it, but it's within everybody. One of the practices that she advocates, again, she's talking to people who've asked her questions. She's not just going out and preaching. She doesn't preach, but she does respond to questions. Somebody asked her about, well, how do you deal with bad people? And she said, well, let's take an extreme case. She said, let's take a case of somebody, you can define bad any way you want. Let's take the case of somebody who's 99% bad and 1% good. She said, always go with the 1% good. Always. Focus on that. Let the rest go. Yeah. That's a discipline. Yeah. She says it's very important to avoid negativity in one's thinking. She says, if I have a bad feeling about you, negative feeling about you, first of all, I'm harming myself because my negativity is cutting off my own light. And secondly, if my negativity is about you, it gets picked up by you. You can sense it, my negativity toward you, and therefore you now have it too. So I'm not only harming myself, but I've put a further burden on your karma. Therefore, negativity is to be avoided. She even to her people closer to her, she even makes suggestions about what kind of music to listen to or not listen to, what kind of movies to see, not to see, because everything's affecting consciousness one way or another. And the last thing I'll say about her is that she, that was interesting. Yeah, the last thing I'll say about her is if you ever do read things that she'd said, you'll notice that everything she's said, or that has been written down that she said, is probably on a 10th or 11th grade level. Anyone can read it who can read. Anyone who can understand it. Anyone can at least understand the words she's using. There's no fancy language. There's no metaphysics. There's nothing abstract. It's just very straightforward. Almost too straightforward sometimes. And hard to miss. I think that's probably enough. If you're, as I say, if you're interested, if you find her interesting, you can at least check out the website. A lot of information there. Even videos, you can see what she looks like in action. She has a headquarters here in California, which is where she's going to be in this month. And the headquarters are there because that's the first place she ever spoke in the United States. And so she has a little place there. And the woman, as I said, that we'll be talking about the first week in December, as she was moving on, she sent most of her Earnest pupils down to Ammachi so they could continue getting what they've been getting from her. So I'll close with a preview of coming attractions, if you don't mind. Just take a moment. Maybe. Yeah, the one we'll be talking about the first week in December is named, as I told you, Anandamaya Ma, which translates as bliss-permeated mother. These are all like titles given to these people. They're not born with these names. But most of you have probably heard of Yogananda. Yeah, he's one of the first popularizers of Eastern thought in the West in the early part of the 20th century. Very well known, regardless of what one thought of him. He's quite well known. He wrote the famous book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which a lot of people have read. Anyway, this Anandamaya Ma, who we're going to be talking about in December, first week of December, Yogananda heard about this Anandamaya Ma, and he asked her to come and see him. I mean, this is a world-famous man. He's asking this relatively unknown young woman to come and see him because he's heard about her. And when she gets there, he says to her, please tell me a little bit about yourself. And here's the quotation. Here's her response to Yogananda. Father, there is little to tell. My consciousness has never associated itself with this temporary body. Before I came on this earth, Father, I was the same. I grew into womanhood, but still I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And Father, in front of you now, I am the same. Even afterwards, though the dance of creation changes around me in the hall of eternity, I shall be the same. So that's what we'll be talking about the first week of December. Yeah, so thank you for coming.